So today we're going to be going over the programming concept of arguments, and our learning outcome for today is that hopefully by the end of this little experiment, this exercise, you will be able to input information into your program using arguments. So the first thing is you probably are wondering, well, what the heck is an argument, right? Well, arguments are ways that we tell the program how to behave. So if we were to call a Python script in the below example, we can see that there are a series of arguments. And these arguments actually start right after Python. So this would be the first argument, the second argument, third argument, and fourth argument. But typically, the first argument is always the name of the script. So these are the successive arguments that we're adding to the script. And these things that we're putting there will help determine what the program actually does. An example would be in Unix, if you were to write ls space -l, you would get the long list. That's an argument that changes the behavior of the program. Or for grep, if you went grep space -v, that is going to invert your grep search, and you will avoid lines that have the regular expression on them. Right. So that's some example of how arguments can manipulate programs that we have already used in class. But in this case, we're actually interested in arguments that may affect the programs that we're writing. They allow us greater flexibility and greater opportunity to write more complex and more interesting programs. And basically, how do we do that is when you give an argument on a command line, such as above, in this example, arguments will then be imported into your program and become variables within your program. These variables can then be used to control the behavior of your program. And an important thing to consider as we bring these variables in and they start to become entities that now exist within your program is what type of variable are they when they're imported into your program. Just like with file import output, it's the same kind of idea, same concept. These variables are imported or inputted as strings. So if you want to do any kind of multiplication, any kind of usage as an integer, as like a index or something like that, they need to be an integer, a float, or even a Boolean, you'll have to recast these variables to be whatever you'd like them to be. So what does it look like to use variables? How do we use variables? If we examine an example script, such as this is the basic way by which we would use variables. One of the things you'll note is I'm showing you this in a script. The example I showed you on the previous slide came as a script. We wouldn't really use arguments when we're running stuff in our development environment, Jupyter. Right? There's no reason to, if we're not running that program from a command line, we wouldn't use arguments. Arguments are used when we run programs from command lines. Right? And we want to control behavior in a certain way. So just to show you how the arguments work, structurally they work, the first thing we have here is our shebang line. And then the next thing we have, remember we learned how to import modules last time, is that we import a module called sys. Now sys is a module which is installed in all Python installations, but you have to write import sys, otherwise Python won't have the ability to access this list of arguments. So when we import sys, we also import an object called sys.argv. Argv is a list of arguments that belongs to this sys module. So when we import this sys module, what we then find is that we have this list of arguments that now exists within this script. And I'll demonstrate what this means in a second. So if I import this module, and the first thing I want to do is I just want to figure out, okay, how many arguments do I have in this list? If I go to a command line and I call these arguments, say A, B, and C. So notice I'm calling the program interpreter. I then am identifying the program I want to call, and then I list 1, 2, 3 arguments, A, B, and C, followed by a space, each one of them. And that space is what delineates between each of these arguments. If I then hit return, you'll notice it'll tell me that I've got 4 arguments. Why 4? Because after Python, there's the script name, there is A, B, and C. If I wanted to see which argument was in which part of this list, I could just say, hey, print out the element that's in the 2 position, and let's see what it is. So I can access these arguments as items in this list, sysargv. So if I do this, right, I should print out the 0, 1, 2 position item in this list, which should be B. And there it is. So you can see that now these items, which I put in my command line call of this script, now have become part of this program. So if instead I was interested in not just what one of these specific arguments were, but I wanted to look at all of them, I could actually loop through this list. So here, again, I'm generating a list of numbers that's the length of this list, minus 1, right? Because the first position of the list is 0. And then I offer to print each element of that list, and I use I to mark the index, the position of that element, and sys.argv bracket I to access the item of that list at that position. So now if I run that script, you can see it prints out how many number of arguments are there. Then it'll print out the elements. Element 0 is the name of the script. Element 1, A, B, is A, 2, B, 3, C. I can change up these arguments now to be anything I want. I can make it 1, 2, 3. I can make it hello class, right? In all of these cases, and I can even change, I can add more elements, right? And in all these cases, these elements are now part of my program, listed as sys.argv. Now, what if I wanted to do something with these variables? For instance, what if I wanted to do something like, hey, what if I had numbers and I wanted to multiply 2 numbers that I'm going to import by each other? So here, I could take an example where I have some numbers for arguments. And if I try to do it, notice that I get an error. It says I can't multiply sequence by non-int of type string. In this case, remember, I have imported these elements, these arguments, and when they were imported, just like when we do file IO, they came imported as string elements, as string variables. So I have to recast them if I want to do math on them. So in this case, an int is sufficient. I could also do floats if that's what you prefer. But I can recast them. And now if I run this script, you'll see that it outputs the product of multiplying 1 by 2, which of course is 2. So that's just a brief demonstration on how arguments work, right? So you can take this list, which follows the name of your script, of different elements separated by spaces, and import them into your program to control behavior. A slightly more advanced example of this is in this little script. And so in this script, you notice I've got some extra code. So again, we start off with our shebang. We follow it by the import statement. And then the next thing we have is this if statement. And basically it says if the length of the sysargv list is less than 2. So in other words, if I was to write Python argument 2 py, so therefore my list of arguments is only 1 long. So if it's less than 2, then it's going to print out some information, right? And what it's going to print out is a usage statement. This is something that is often done in any kind of programming because you might have your script that you want someone else to use, so you have to give it a usage statement. So there's some information on how to use the script, specifically the format for using this script, and then you exit the sys module because you're done with it. And you're done with the program. If I then call my program as written, one of the things I can do is I can use -I and -O to identify when the following argument, the I plus 1 argument, is a variable of interest to me. In this case, either the in-file name or the out-file name. And here, I'll just print them in and out for you. I'll print them out for you. So if I am to run this script, if I was to run it without any arguments, I would run it and it would output this statement on how to use it. So always useful thing. Oh, it's a test script to see how arguments work. That's awesome. To use it, I need to use -I and the name of the input file and -O and the name of the output file. So we'll just call it in file and -O, we'll call this out file. Now if I run the program, right, it prints in file name and out file name. Maybe instead of this, I know that they're going to be CSV files, so I can put .csv. Again, when I run it, it'll output and print the name of each one of these files. So these inputs, these arguments, have actually now become variables within my program. Pretty cool stuff. So now we can use things on command line to alter the behavior of these scripts and pass information into them. One of the other interesting things to look is if I happen just to switch the order and I put the O first and the I second, or the I after it, notice that in file is still printed as the in file and out file is still printed as the out file. The reason being is that what determines the definition of in file name is that simply it's the list element that comes after -I. So as long as this element always comes after -I, you won't have any problems. As long as this element always comes after -O, you won't have any problems. A nice way in case you happen to, nice little tool to use in case you happen to ever enter your arguments in different order than you intend.